Welcome to your weekend. I'm Mike Kraus from CompleteColorado.com. I'm sitting in for John Caldera, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, but he's actually at a cheer competition. I don't know if you knew this about the man, but he's a cheer dad. He'll be back in a couple of weeks. Stick around. A little bit later in the show, we're going to talk to actually an environmental activist about corporate welfare of all things. But first, we're going to talk about film and culture and the politics of film with Christian Toto. Christian, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
You've got this very cool gig, by the way, HollywoodandToto.com, that you review film and television, I would assume also, since we're in the golden age of television.
That's right.
From a more conservative perspective than many of your colleagues in the film criticism world would do it. Is that a fair way to put it?
Maybe the rest of the 98%.
The other 90, I didn't want to say that. I wanted you to say the other 98%.
That's right.
Because you actually wrote about that, and we'll talk about that. But this really interesting gig as a film critic. And you actually, your real claim to fame, though, obviously, is that you occasionally write for CompleteColorado.com,
Exactly.
right here in Colorado. And you've written some really interesting things that I want to talk about, because I think they tie in nicely to the Academy Awards and what we saw and what we see every year. And as we film this, the awards were last Sunday. You wrote a piece where you talked about your fellow film critics, as a general rule, overwhelmingly leaning to the left politically. And not so much that they just lean to the left, but that it shows in their reviews. Explain that.
Yeah. It's funny, when I first entered newspaper business, I was a film critic, and I never thought about ideology, I never thought about politics. As my career went on and as the culture went on, everything got more political. So, talk shows and movies, and everywhere you look, there was a left of center, right of center slant. Of course, it's from Hollywood. It's almost always left of center. And then I noticed my fellow critics would inject that into their reviews. It might be Roger Ebert, the dean of movie critics. He would let you know without a shadow of a doubt what his politics were, and also why that mattered and why that should matter to you as you're watching the movie. And it just kind of caught me off guard. And then at some point I thought, well, I am right of center, and there are very few people like me doing movie reviews, so I should embrace that. And my policy on this is, if I write for The Nation, which is left of center, I should let my left of center flag fly, because that's what the readers expect. And if I write for the National Review, I would do the opposite, because that's what your readers expect, and that's what they are. But if you are, writing for the AP or a Newswire or a mainstream daily paper, you should be straight down the middle, because that's what a news person should do. And I don't see that. I see that all the time in the opposite direction. If a movie comes out, I will see film critics from major outlets who will count the number of minority actors in the screen, and if it's not sufficient to their liking, they'll put it in their review. You need more people of color in the story. But what if the story didn't reflect that? Or maybe it could be an all-black cast, or there's lots of different reasons why a production is a certain way, but they would judge it on that basis. And there's a lot of different examples as well. So I felt comfortable being right of center. I have my own website, and when people come to me, they kind of know what to expect. So I'm not going to be, kind of chasing people away. I'm not going to be misguiding people. I am a right of center critic. You can expect that. And then on the other hand, though, if a movie is left of center and it's good, I'll recommend it. I would hardly recommend it. It's not, I can't be dishonest that way. And if a movie agrees with my political philosophy and it's bad, it's poorly constructed, I have to call it out too. So I think at the end of the day, no matter where you are in the spectrum, you've got to be honest, and you've got to serve the reader too, because that's what matters.
That is what matters. And it's interesting you said that Ebert kind of wore it on his sleeve and would just acknowledge it and tell you why that mattered. And you're doing the same thing. But what about the today? I mean, Roger Ebert's hasn't been around for a while. Are left of center film critics, are they acknowledging that, or are they just intertwining into their work and letting it hang out there? Are they doing what Ebert did?
They are, and in some sense it's pretty obvious what they're doing. And sometimes it's very angry in what they do. I've read reviews that were cursing out Clint Eastwood for his movie The Mule, because his character, I wouldn't call him a racist character, but he was in his 80s. He spoke in a way where his generation would address certain issues. He wouldn't use African American for a person of color. He'd use something else, not a hateful word, but just what he grew up using. And he'd be called on the carpet for that during the movie. And I didn't think it was a racist or evil character. It just was someone stuck in his own time. And some of the critics were just excoriating about that aspect of the movie, to the point where they said, we don't know if he can be redeemed at the end. But movies are about redeeming characters. It's about evolution. It's about growth. And you can have a character who maybe is ignorant about some topic, and then as the movie goes on is educated or learns or grows or sees the error of his ways or her ways. And that's why we watch movies. We want to see that process. It's captivating. And so for critics to say, well, this character is stricken from the record because he had these outdated views, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we watch drug dealers on TV and we root for them sometimes. Look at Breaking Bad. A part of us wanted Walter White to succeed, even though he was doing terrible things. But we kind of connected with his humanity, and we saw some growth and some, I guess, the opposite of growth along the way.
So, okay, let's talk. So the film critics overwhelmingly lean left, but we also see this, that they're simply, are they just a reflection of the broader Hollywood culture? Because you've also written for us about the politics of Hollywood. And let's talk about that because it ties in nicely to the Academy Awards, where there were some really good films up for Best Picture. I mean, A Star is Born is a great film. Black Panther is a spectacular action adventure movie, which, as we talked about before the show, has actually kind of broken a glass ceiling of the Marvel genre breaking into Best Picture, which I think is pretty significant. But how the hell did Vice get nominated for Best Picture? You wrote a whole column about how, I believe you called it an unhinged screed. And so how does an unhinged screed, which is frankly just not a very good movie, it did not do well in Rotten Tomatoes, as you pointed out, although some left of center critics tried to breathe life into it. It was just a bad documentary. How does that end up in a Best Picture nomination, along with pictures like The Green Book, Black Panther, A Star is Born?
Well, you hate to say it's politics, but I can't see any other reason because of what you said. Now, I'm right of center, so this is not aimed at me. But at the same time, the Daily Beast, which is a left of center outlet, said, is this the worst movie of the year regarding Vice? And again, the Rotten Tomato score was not off the charts. Usually any Best Picture nominees got 80, 90% fresh, which means the critics liked it. It's hard not to see anything else but the ideology. And this is not a movie that's just critical of Vice President Cheney. It's critical about many tenets of the GOP. So it's not just a hyper-focused attack. It's all across the board. And it's clumsy and it's cartoonish at times. And there were good things about it. Christian Bale literally transforms into Dick Cheney. The mannerisms, the way he speaks, the look, the makeup actually won an Oscar.
Right.
Deservedly so. It's a spectacular achievement. So it's hard to say, oh, it was merit when you look at all these different factors. It seems very clearly it wasn't just merit.
So is it okay, do you think, I mean, that it's pretty safe to give a nod for an award to a movie based on its political ideology, knowing that, well, obviously this thing ain't going to win Best Picture, but let's go ahead and acknowledge that overt bias that we approve of. Is that what?
Well, I mean, I'm a purist. If it's an Oscar-winning film or an Oscar-nominated film, it's got to be the best of the best. I think the Oscars should be stripped of politics and say, what's the best performance, the best motion picture, the best director? That's what the award is all about. So other factors come into play. There's an Oscar campaign each year where the actors from different movies go and they press the flesh. And as a critic, I get a Roma pillow in the mail. I get a Roma hardcover book. I get the screenplay bound. I get all this certain stuff that you're trying to kind of let people know, hey, we had a great movie this year. You should, think about us when it comes time to vote. Now, I'm not an Oscar voting member. I belong to the Critics' Choice Group. But that's part of what happened. So it's politics, it's the campaigning, it's what has that actor done lately? Has the actor been involved in any sort of scandal? There are a lot of different factors. And some of them are sentimental. Maybe an actor in her 70s who has never won, maybe they have an edge sometimes. It hasn't happened recently. So there's different emotional triggers here. But I really hate the fact that an emotional trigger is, I agree with its politics, so ignore the fact that it's a mediocre movie. But that's where we are today.
One of the biggest tells about this year's Academy Awards, and it was, I found it amusing, although a lot of people apparently didn't, is that they could not find a host who was sufficiently pure and woke enough, and had been woke enough throughout their entire career, to actually host this thing. And poor Kevin Hart, who is a tremendous comedian, and is not an overly political guy in his act at all. In fact, he appeals to a very broad audience. Made a tweet was discovered from back in his past, and so he was invited and then uninvited.
Yes.
to host the Oscars. They ended up without a host.
It's amazing, and you called it amusing. I agree. I think it's sad. I was a kid growing up watching the Oscars, and I loved it. I look forward to it every year. Didn't know I was going to be a film critic someday, but I just love movies. And the fact that they can't find someone who could check all the boxes is kind of silly. Now, there have been articles written after Kevin Hart's rise and fall showing, oh, these comics couldn't make it either. And I've read articles from mainstream entertainment reporters saying, well, they needed to vet him better. Vet him? He's a comedian. He should go up there and make us laugh. He's actually one of the few bankable comedians in Hollywood. His movies make money consistently. And you know what? He's aggressively apolitical, and I'm sure it's on purpose because he wants the widest audience possible. And he knows that if he's insulting the left or the right, he's going to lose people in the theaters. He doesn't do that. He's actually very uplifting and positive. You look at him on Twitter, maybe he's self-promotional at times. Who cares, right? He's an actor. He's trying to kind of push out his product, but he's very uplifting. And but he and Dwayne Johnson as well. Chris Pratt comes to mind. Very positive, uplifting, interesting, inspirational on all social media outlets. It's their brand. And yet I think in a way he was punished for that because if they had nominated Alec Baldwin, who's got he doesn't have a skeleton in his closet. He's got a whole array of skeletons. I think he'd be hosting. I think the outrage mob wouldn't be there for him.
Or is it because even though he's got a whole bunch of skeletons and he's done a whole, he's misspoken on numerous occasions.
Yes, he has.
But his politics are right for the Oscars?
Sadly.
Kevin
Right
Hart,
in scare quotes.
Kevin Hart fills stadiums.
Oh, yeah.
Who does that?
Very few
and not
comedians.
in stand-up comedy, for goodness sakes. Here was one of the other big tells, and this goes into the kind of the identity politics that we see in Hollywood, is that Ellen DeGeneres came to Kevin Hart's defense. She's an openly gay woman, and the Twitter mob came after her.
That's right, yeah.
Kevin probably got a couple days of relief because then they got to, and so you really see that there's something almost out of control about this. But you see it kind of reflected in the speeches that are given by these celebrities. Yes.
What's interesting about the speeches, and you've seen this with the Golden Globes, you've seen it at the Oscars, you'll see it more and more. It's this woke presentation. Women must be empowered. We must have more diversity. No. Women should be empowered, and we should have diversity. But it's this, if you look at the numbers out of Hollywood, the number of people behind the camera, the number of people in front of the screen, they haven't fixed the diversity problem yet. They've still got issues. There are very, very few female directors of consequence in the industry. But if they go on stage, they say, this is the year of the woman, we must be strong. Well, that's great, but you're not doing it yet. So why don't you do it and fix it, and then come back to us with your speeches, because the one speech is not going to fix things. You've got to make really significant changes and give more opportunities to people. That's when it matters. But it feels good to make those speeches, and they think that's enough.
And they still haven't owned the Harvey Weinstein issue.
Not completely. It's funny, when that scandal broke, my first thought was, Hollywood lectures, and they lecture, and they lecture.
And they lecture.
How could they do that now? This massive open secret with so many actresses being physically hurt, emotionally scarred for decades. They went on lecturing like nothing happened. It's amazing. And we saw it with Bryan Singer. He's the director of Bohemian Rhapsody. He's been accused of a lot of sexual allegations. They didn't mention his name once, even though his film won multiple awards.
I noticed that. Actually, I read about that the film won awards.
Yeah.
In fact, the lead actor won Best Actor. And no one talked about the director.
He was memory hold.
And normally when you get up there and you thank everybody, especially your director.
He or she is the first person you thank. Like Mary Jones for directing this wonderful movie. She had a vision of me. She supported me. Not a mention. Right. We know it though.
Christian, thanks very much. HollywoodInToto.com, film reviews from a conservative perspective. Thanks for what you do. We're out of time, and thanks for coming on. And by the way, thanks for watching the Oscars, so I didn't have to.
Do I get a fruit basket for that? Come on.
Sure. Actually, I didn't know you got a pillows and such like in the mail. So.
A lot of perks.